Well, thank you, everyone. We are going to start this session on measurement of poverty and inequality. So we have 3 papers and very distinguished speakers. We have Hafiz Pasha Saab, Asad Sayeed Asad. We also have Kabeer Dawani. So first, Asad Sayeed will present his paper, then Hafiz Pasha Saab, and then finally I will present the paper. So we have about 15 minutes for the presentation, about 15 minutes for comments, and also floor discussion.
Thank you.
So, Asad, please.
Kabeer will start and then I'll take over.
Okay.
Thank you. We're presenting a paper on living wages in Pakistan. I'll present the first half of the presentation, and my colleague Asad will present the next. So the outline of our presentation is that I'll set up the context, give the methodology that we've used for this, for the estimation. We have 3 living wage estimates, one for rural Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and one for rural Northeast Punjab, and one for urban Northeast Punjab. We'll compare these to benchmarks with poverty lines and minimum wages, and then we'll discuss some of the implications of this in terms of policy. So the background that we have for our discussion is a very high inflation in Pakistan, as we all know. This graph shows how it spiked in 2021, reaching up to more than 40%. We've had increasing in poverty. The World Bank estimates that it increased from 34% to 39%. And there will be about 95 million people living in Pakistan below poverty, based on the World Bank's $3.65 poverty line. And then we have actually research by Dr. Pasha that shows that real wages declined by 29% from December 2018 to July 23, which means that effectively what you could buy in 2018 you can buy a third less in 2023. Another graph to show you the real wage growth in Pakistan. This is in 2021 rupees, so it's inflation adjusted. There was only 1.1% real wage growth between 1999 and 2021, which is really a staggering figure, that there's been no real wage growth for more than 20 years. So in this context of very high inflation, no or low real wage growth, and increasing poverty, we have this discussion about, how much would it cost for a worker and his or her family to live a basic but decent life in Pakistan. This is where the idea of a living wage comes in. The definition we use for a living wage is remuneration received for a standard work week by a worker in a particular place sufficient to afford a decent standard of living for the worker and his or her family. Elements of a decent standard of living include food, water, housing, education, healthcare, transport, clothing, and other essential needs, including emergencies. A living wage is recognized as a need by the international human rights community. It's in part of the ILO Constitution and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, both of which Pakistan is signatory to. So as I mentioned, we've done 3 living wage estimates that came out in 2 reports. In Northeast Punjab, we focused on the Sialkot region, both the urban and the rural. And in KP, we did our study in 3 districts, in Swabi, Charsadda, and Mardan. In Sialkot, our focus was on the sports ball manufacturing workers, and in KP, we focused on tobacco farmers. Both these reports have a detailed discussion on the methodology, but I'll give you a broad overview of the methodology we use. It's called the anchor methodology. It's been used in 51 countries across the world. This map shows all the places that have living wage benchmarks using this methodology. There's many different kinds. I think there's 26 or 27 different kinds of methodologies for living wages across the world. There's certain advantages that this particular methodology has. It's regionally specific, so there's no one benchmark for Pakistan given different costs of living across the country. It ensures that there's a certain minimum threshold of standard of living that is achieved. It's based on normative standards. It uses a mix of primary and secondary data, so it doesn't only rely on secondary data. The use of secondary data is limited so that we also don't reproduce poverty. So existing household surveys, consumption-based household surveys will report existing levels of consumption, which are usually below the minimum standard of living we're looking at. And then it also has greater granularity compared to other benchmarks. Most other living wage methodologies have two categories. So they have food and non-food. But we know that non-food is the biggest chunk of expenditure. So this one, the anchor methodology has three components. They have food, housing, and then non-food, non-housing, which has everything else. And lastly, it's a family concept. So it's not for the household. It's for a nuclear family. And the nuclear family is regional specific. It's not universally defined. So we have different family sizes for each of the three benchmarks we've used, which is based on fertility and mortality data that we have for those regions. So these are the steps to estimate a living wage. We have the cost of living that for our reference family size, which has 4 inputs. There's food costs, housing costs, non-food, non-housing costs, and then a small buffer for emergencies, which is 5% of the total. We estimate food and housing through a mix of primary and secondary data, and then non-food, non-housing is based on secondary data, but we have a caveat that for education, health, and transport, we do adjustments based on what we found in the primary field work. And then the cost of living is divided by the number of workers per family to get the net living wage. And then we get a gross living wage, which is grossed up to include taxes and any other contributions in Pakistan. That's mostly social security contributions in formal enterprises. So the estimates for living wages in Pakistan that we have, we did the studies in 2 different time periods. In Sialkot, we did it in December 2015. And in KP, we did it in April 2021. And then we've updated them for inflation to October 2023. And we note that Pakistan will need more than what we have right now. Like it needs maybe 8 or 9 more living wage estimates across the country, given the differing costs of living in different areas. So in KP, the living wage is 63,883 rupees. In rural Sialkot, it's 43,538 rupees. And in urban Sialkot, it's 47,260 rupees, all in October 2023. I just want to discuss briefly the fact that the 2 rural estimates are slightly different, for which we have several reasons. One is that the 2 regions differ, which is the idea of, which is why we need differing estimates. KP is, things are much more far apart. There's lower population density. People, there's lower transport connectivity and so on. The family size we used in KP is also different. We have 6 people in a family in KP and 5.5 in rural Punjab, given the higher fertility rates there. The number of workers was lower in KP, 1.48 versus 1.65 in Punjab, which means the cost of a living are divided by a smaller denominator in KP. And then, sorry, I have 5 minutes. I'll rush it. So food costs are different. For our model diet that we estimate, the calories required in KP were higher, given that farm work, our reference was farm workers, so there's more vigorous activity, while in Punjab it was moderate levels of activity. And then we have adjustments for health, education, transport, given that we are adjusting from a lower base. The increase in KP was higher. And we also have differences in the utility costs and the timing that we estimate. So I'll hand over to Asad to discuss the wages in context and the policy implications.
How do you word this?
Just press the, yeah.
Thanks, Kabeer. So to carry on, we constructed these wage ladders for each of the estimates we did. And so we've taken all possible estimates that are available for wages. That includes the World Bank, poverty line of $365 a day, $3.65 a day. And then there is the minimum wage. There's the wage at the national poverty line. And then the estimates that the labor force survey does for elementary workers and for unskilled workers and masons. So it's one of the estimates come from the economic survey, the rest from the labor force survey. And we see that there is a significant gap between what our estimate for the living wage in rural KP is compared to what these measures or these existing estimates tell us. So it's twice, our living wage estimate is twice the minimum wage in KP, 3 times the World Bank's poverty line wage, and 51% higher than the average wage for skilled agricultural workers. It's similar, the gaps are fairly similar and as wide in rural Sialkot also, 36% higher than our estimate is 36% higher than the minimum wage, 3 times higher than the World Bank poverty line wage. However, the average monthly wage for skilled workers that the labor force survey reports, it's fairly similar to that. So this is one estimate where the gap is minimal, in fact, close to zero. For urban Sialkot, the gap is similar. You can see it's 48% higher than the minimum wage, significantly higher for the World Bank one, etc. So I think that, the point is that the living wage estimate that we have based on our estimate, our criteria, which is much higher than what prevails or what is mandated as the minimum wage. Now, what are the policy implications and challenges? Obviously, the only instrument in Pakistan that is put forth for this is the minimum wage. The minimum wage as an instrument is a very old one in Pakistan. The law came about in 1961. It was expanded somewhat in 1969, and after the 18th Amendment, it's been devolved to the provinces. But the law hasn't altered much at all, except probably slightly in Sindh. So what of this instrument, there are issues which are in terms of scope, in terms of the process of determination, and in terms of enforcement. It leaves a lot to be desired, to say the least. So the scope is very limited in the sense that it excludes public sector employees, it excludes agricultural workers, and it excludes, by its nature, the informal sector, which is about 2/3 of the non-agricultural labor force. The process of determination is arbitrary, and there are minimum wage boards, but they don't have any standard or robust method through which the minimum wage is to be calculated or updated based on inflation. And the law also doesn't require the government to actually abide by what the minimum wage board's recommendations are. So they remain recommendatory and not obligatory. And so we all know what the process is, which is completely arbitrary and whimsical. And it's at the time of the budget, the federal government announces a minimum wage, and by and large, all provinces just follow through on that particular wage the week after that, or whenever their budgets are announced. Enforcement is also extremely weak. So apart from the fact that your scope is limited, there's very little enforcement, there's no process of determination which is transparent and transparent and methodical in some ways. Now, is reform of the minimum wage process possible? Now, in principle, it would be possible. So if we are to close this gap between the minimum wage and the living wage, say not in one go, but over time also, and we assume that the law changes and capability and capacity increases, and we are about to go through the entire process of enforcing it, it will mean a very significant redistribution from capital to labor. Now, given Pakistan's political milieu, in the short to medium run, and the way the state is structured, and the influence of capital, that doesn't look likely. So what do we do? I think the important thing before we do anything is to first understand or determine what we call the reservation wage, the lowest wage at which people are willing to work. Now, that's an estimation which has not been done in Pakistan in any systematic way. The closest we thought that any estimation that comes to is the elementary wage, the wage for elementary workers that's given in the labor force survey. And that comes to, as you can see over here, updated to October 2023, it comes to about 25,500. So the gap is, say, at least it's half of what the living wage, or it's what the living wage is. So that's the distance we have to cover. So our understanding is that instead of chasing after a wage policy through a minimum wage, one can work towards increasing the the floor wage or the floor income of the household through social protection. So that is one way that you plug part of the gap, and the rest of the gap would be hopefully come through either through economic growth and wages increasing in the market, or through the enforcement of the minimum wage. But the quantum in that case of the minimum wage would be much lower. The good thing about social protection in Pakistan is that there is some level of political consensus on it. And number one, there's political consensus on it. Number two, the National Socioeconomic Registry has created a platform from which we can actually provide social protection to a much larger group of people and target it towards workers and the poorest households. Already the BISP unconditional cash transfer is going to 9 million women in the country. That could be increased. So that seems to be the most appropriate instrument for that, for plugging that gap. Obviously, the binding constraint is the fisc, and there can be no one better than Dr. Pasha to further elaborate on the fiscal situation. So there could be a mix of reduction in subsidies going to the rich and increasing the share of non-poor subsidies to the non-poor, and improving the overall fiscal situation for that to be made possible. So what do we conclude on this? The conclusion really is that the living wage, we contend, is because of its contextual and detailed methodology, is a good and perhaps a better measure to benchmark poverty estimates than the others. But to have a proper aggregated as well as differentiated living wage estimation, we need to do a number of other estimates apart from the three that we have done, and that we need to move away from solely focusing on wage policy and concentrate a lot more on social protection to even enhance returns to labor by increasing the floor wage and the floor income of households. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Asad and Kabeer. So now I request Dr. Hafiz Pasha.
Okay. Let me start by saying that this is indeed an extremely appropriate subject to have researched on. At this time, the people of Pakistan are facing a living wage gap which they have probably never in their lives seen before. And let me just highlight to you the magnitude of the problem. One of my students who's doing her MPhil, recently we had done a somewhat more casual estimation of the poverty line which is required today in Pakistan to accommodate fully the extraordinary increase in food prices that we have seen. I mean, imagine atta, which is the staple of the people of Pakistan, has doubled in 1 year, the price. This is unbelievable. So the point is that it's very interesting, and I was very pleased when I saw that at least two of your estimates, particularly in Punjab, are at close to 43 to 44,000 rupees.
47 and
43.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And interestingly, my student had estimated it at 45,000 rupees. So that's quite remarkable. Now, based on that number, we worked out in quantitative terms, what is the poverty gap in Pakistan today, which is how much more do the poor of Pakistan need to be able to have a subsistence and a life of modest quality. We have quantified that poverty gap. And first of all, let me start by saying that the World Bank is being extra cautious in terms of its estimates of the incidence of poverty in Pakistan today. With a poverty line at 45 for a family of 6.4, our estimate is that the incidence of poverty today has crossed 44% of the population. This is our latest, absolutely latest estimate. Over 110 million people of Pakistan today are poor. I actually close to having tears in my eyes when I mention these statistics. We have spent our lives, all of us, working in this country, but we have never seen this kind of a tragedy. How much is the poverty gap in Pakistan today? A careful estimate, 2,260 billion rupees. This is the transfer or the injection in the income that is required to eliminate poverty. 2,260 billion rupees. And how much does the wonderful Benazir Income Support Program, you're absolutely right, one of the few programs where there is a degree of conviction and commitment. And I must compliment the managers of the BISP, including you and others, for having targeted very well the potential recipients. The budget this year for the BISP is 460 billion rupees, which may or may not be met. Does that mean that Pakistan is catering through its public resources for only 20% of the poverty gap of our people? And yours truly did a very difficult piece of research quantifying the privileges given to the elite of this country in the United Nations Human Development Report of 21. Today, those benefits add up to 4,500 billion rupees. Very carefully estimated. Very carefully estimated. And we require 2,250 billion for the poor. The point made by the writers that we need progressive taxation to cater for the relief and to enhance wages is a fundamental point, and believe me, the time will come whether this country, politically or otherwise, will not be able to survive without having to do this. So let me stop by saying that the time has come to take care of the poor, whether we like it or not. Thank you.
Asad, would you like to reply on?
No, I mean...
Okay, now the floor is open for any questions. Yes.
Excellent work. Very good work.
Thank you so much for this. These numbers are absolutely mind-boggling. And especially after what Dr. Hafiz has said, we had some kind of idea about the numbers, but these numbers are absolutely mind-boggling. I'm a little confused about the data of Punjab and KP, rural Sindh, because I always thought Sialkot is one of the most enterprising place in Punjab, where you have a large number of industries, maybe small, big, medium size. People are employed generally, and they're extremely also enterprising. But the minimum wage, what you have said, 65K for KP and 43 and 47 for rural and urban Sialkot is a little confusing to me, because I always thought that wages in Punjab are higher than in KP, one. Number two, I'm also a little, I find it a little strange about the family size of KP. It's 6.4, which probably may not be true because in KP generally people do not, especially in the rural KP, I'm talking about the FATA areas and all that, they do not normally tell you the number of the girls in the family. They just talk about boys. If you go to any household survey and the population survey, the parents, the house leader or the father of the house will come out and ask about the kids. He would say 6 or 4. And you would ask how many boys and girls. He said 4 boys. You have girls also? Yes. How many? And he will be very reluctant to tell you 2 or 3 or, whatever. So probably the size of, added to that, when we are talking about poverty level, $3.65, is it per capita or is it for the household?
Per capita.
It's per capita, right? Thank you.
Okay, over there.
And it's in PPP terms, purchasing power
yes,
parity terms.
yeah.
It's not the nominal dollar.
Hello, sir. Hi, sir. So I had a small question about the importance of vocational education and certifications. So as Dr. Asad, mentioned about the gap in the wages, but the biggest problem in Pakistan is that we have a lot of people who are unskilled. You see, the kids from 6 to 18 to 20 to 50 years, we don't have any criteria to understand what is their skill level. On the one side, we're setting a base or the floor wage for them, it's maybe 45 or 30K. But on the ground, when during my, in a small experience when I went for the surveys, I found out that the employer says that this kid has no skill, so I pay him 200 rupees per day. But this guy, he's experienced, that's why I pay him 1500 per day. So can you just help me understand that if the government coupling it with the BISP programs like that to invest into skilling of the workers and and make some categories so that when the floors are set, it are based on evidence that the people who have this level of skill, they'll be paid this much and then so on. Thank you.
Okay, any other question? Over there.
Assalamualaikum. I actually had a question regarding the idea of a living wage or a minimum wage. I'm really very early in the research, so I'm trying to understand here. So I always feel that a living wage or a minimum wage creates kind of a distortion in the economy because it creates a surplus. First of all, implementing a wage is very difficult because, for example, I'm from Karachi, so I see people getting a certain wage and then writing on paper a completely different wage and signing it to be submitted as a document. So I don't think there's implementation, may be very difficult. But even if it's implemented, do you think an alternate way is to help people participate more in the economy through, for example, access to finance or something? Because this whole subsidiary mechanism and transfer mechanism really limits people from participating in the economy. I mean, the market structure remains the same. The same companies keep working. We take some tax and then we give it to people who do not participate in the economy. So is it possible that we make them participate more?
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, Asad, would you like to respond?
You want to start
Yeah.
on the first one?
So, no, thank you for your question. With regard to the family size first, in KP, we estimate our family size to be 6 people, which is 2 adults and 4 children. It's based on data from the labor force survey, and we use calculations based on mortality and fertility to come up with how many people there will be in the family. And we exclude large households, so anything more than 9 people, and also single family households in our calculations. So I mean, as to the extent that the labor force survey is a valid source of data, that's how we estimate it. With regards to your second question about the differences between KP and Punjab in the 2 estimates, we tried explaining it. The first biggest difference is that the costs of living are for 6 people in KP and for 5.5 people in Punjab, in rural Punjab. In urban Punjab, it's lower at 5 people. There's a difference in the way utilities were calculated in the two, so that helps explain the part of the difference. There's a big difference in the food costs because of a different diet. So both the diets are different. The estimates are from a different point in time. When in 2015, Pakistan's GDP per capita was around $1,200. In 2021, it was $1,500. So at a different level of development. The living wage is also estimated for a different number of workers. A lower number of workers are used for KP, it's 1.48. So when you're dividing the cost of living for a family, you divide it by 1.48 for KP and 1.65 in Punjab. So you get a slightly higher living wage in KP because of that as well. But if you do the Punjab estimation through the KP method, so at 6 people, at the same number of workers, it comes much closer. So it's just the fact that there are 2 different regions.
Okay, thank you very much for excellent presentation.
Sir, 2 और सवाल थे.
Is there any more questions?
We need to answer the 2 questions, 2 more questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go on.
Ji. One was on vocational education. I mean, we're talking about the 2 poorest or 3 poorest deciles in the income distribution. So vocational training is a wonderful idea and should be done, but in a milieu where there's continuous economic stagnation and there's very little that is coming through in terms of demand for labor. So what you have, and Pakistan is not the only country where what they call there's a reserve army of labor. So that gap to be removed through only vocational education or through human capital development is not going to be possible. What you're going to be doing without more investment and higher growth is that there would be more capable people working for lower wages, because that's the way the market will remain which is a surplus labor market. If any of you are from the law faculty at LUMS, I wonder if there is anyone, unlikely, but they just recently did some work on law graduates getting very little or very low salaries, and it's for a similar reason, that there's an excess supply of lawyers. So I was just trying to illustrate that point. On the distortion of the economy, it's actually very interesting that 10 years ago or 9 years ago, I was asked to do a study to see if BISP is distorting the economy by raising the floor wage of women workers. And we actually did a study and we found that it wasn't actually increasing, so it wasn't pulling women out of the workforce, which meant that their floor wage or reservation wage, BISP was not even sufficient to raise the reservation wage.
Absolutely.
So this distortion story is actually very much an American story, and in a milieu where there is such high levels of poverty, that won't work. In any case, my argument ultimately is that wage policy is not the only one. You would have to really go the social protection route.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
We agreed.
Okay, thank you. Very. Now I request Hafiz Pasha Sahab to present.
Do you mind if we switch so that
Yeah,
I can
okay.
sit?
This is the clicker.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chairperson, and ladies and gentlemen. As always, it is a wonderful opportunity and a great point of interaction with a very illuminated and well-informed audience. So thank you for being here. And we've just enjoyed a wonderful session on the living wage and a very good response. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what I'm going to be talking about is about what's happening to regional disparities in our country. And this is an important issue because we do not want in a federation for there to be large and growing gaps between the different members of the federation, because as per the Article 37A of the Constitution of Pakistan, it states clearly, and this we must treat this seriously because this is our honorable constitution, to which we are all sworn to. Promote with special care the educational and economic interests of backward areas or classes. A clear statement in the Constitution of Pakistan. So it is very important for us to know, and the tragedy is that whereas India, which has, of course, many more federation members approaching the early 30s, Pakistan has 4 members, India has been very careful to monitor, quantify, and measure the trends in regional disparities. And you'll be surprised that for the last 40 to 50 years, India has had state-level GDP estimates by sector available for each of the states of India. For the last many, many years, even when I was in government, I had been forcing this move on the part of the Pakistan Bureau of Statistics, but unfortunately, for reasons which are better left unspecified, there was no desire for us to know explicitly what the divergence between the 4 members of the federation is in terms of the per capita income or GDP. So I did not succeed because this information was considered inappropriate by you-know-who. However, we have continued, and I'm pleased to report that as far back as 1999, and many, many years ago, in fact, one of my outstanding PhD students, Dr. Kabeer Bengali, who's quite famous now, did the first quantification of rural GDPs, if you remember.
Yeah.
And it was an outstanding piece of work, and he was immediately given a doctorate for that. We have since maintained an exercise in updating this through institutions like the Social Policy and Development Center and so on and so forth, more recently at my university in Lahore. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you what the numbers look like, and we will see what that means in terms of some of its implications. The analysis is from 1999-2000, when Kabeer finished his work, to 2018-19, which is, I stopped at 2018-19 because thereafter we had COVID and we had floods and so on and so forth. So the last normal year in some ways was 2018-19. The gross regional product estimation methodology are estimates detailed at the sectoral level. I have presented already in the United Nations Development Programs and National Human Development Report of 2021 for Pakistan. Each sector, the 16 to 17 sectors of the economy, we have estimated the regional share of each province and thereby derived the gross regional product, work which should have been done by the Pakistan Bureau of Statistics. Academics have had to do it, which is unfortunate. We must know where we stand in the federation. We have developed 3 measures of inequality. The standard one, of course, we all know is Gini. Then in this report, a seminal work was done in developing a new inequality measure. And it's referred to now as the Pasha ratio. It has been widely circulated and published in international journals. And I will show you what the Pasha ratio is. and then the dispersion ratio, which is simply the difference in per capita income between the richest province and the poorest province of Pakistan. Now, I'm not going to go through the maths of this, but this is an expanded version of Palma ratio. The Palma ratio looks at the ratio between the top quintile and the bottom quintile, if you like, or the top 10% versus the bottom 2 quintiles. We look at the ratio across the quintiles. That's why you notice they're Y2 over Y1, Y3 over Y2, Y4 over Y3. And I'm pleased to report that this measure has been accepted internationally and is now being used generally. First, let me present to you the trend in what has been happening to the 4 provincial economies of Pakistan. In 1999-2000, a fascinating result, which very few people probably would realize. Needless to say, Sindh was number 1 in terms of per capita income, 21.6% above the national average. But what is surprising is that in 1999-2000, Balochistan was second. Why? 2 or 3 reasons. 1, very low population base, hardly 4% less of the population, maybe slightly more now. At that time, it was 4.5% or so. 2, at that time, peak of natural gas exploitation. For a small province, that was a major, it was like an OPEC economy in that sense. And of course, it had other forms of income accruing to it through minor crops and other minerals. So the ranking was that in 2000, Sindh was first, Balochistan was second, Punjab was third, and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa was a laggard, following with a ratio of only 0.739, it was fourth. Over the last almost 20 years, we have seen some changes fundamentally in the rankings. And this is perhaps being made available publicly for the first time. Sindh continues to be first, particularly because during the Musharraf period, Sindh performed exceptionally well because of the extraordinary industrial growth those years and export growth. So Sindh has maintained its divergence from the national average at 1.244. What is fascinating is that Punjab now is second. We all generally think that Punjab is second, but actually 20 years ago, Punjab was third. And now the position is that Khyber Pakhtunkhwa has moved up to the third position, and the province of Balochistan, which was second, has crumbled and fallen down to the fourth position. This is the root of the federation's problem. The process, in a way, of, unfortunately, Balochistan going down the hill. The amazing thing is that over the last 20 years, because of the higher population growth rate of almost 3.5% reported, Balochistan has seen little or no increase in real per capita income. And part of the reason, of course, is that its reserves are now denuded and more or less deleted. Sui gas is more or less finished. And new substantial reserves have not been found yet. In fact, if you're finding mineral resources, today it's in Sindh, coal and so on. Of course, we have the famous Rakodek, but the exploitation of that still remains very marginal. The heart of the problem is the falling behind increasingly of Balochistan, which has all kinds of implications because it is physically, geographically, the largest province of Pakistan, over 40%. It faces the entire coast of the ocean. And third, with all due respects, there is this feeling and a lingering feeling about a degree of autonomy and a search on the part of Baloch youth for more rights. And if we are seeing at this point in time Balochistan going down, this is indeed a tragedy for the Federation of Pakistan. Let me just take you now to the results. Look at the dispersion ratio. It has slightly increased. The Gini coefficient has slightly increased. The Pashum ratio has remained more or less unchanged. There is some little bit of ambiguity of regional inequality change from 2000 to 2018-19, and that is why, the reason for that is the falling down of Balochistan has been countered by the rise of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Why has Khyber Pakhtunkhwa gone up? There are 2 or 3 reasons. One, since 2001, after the 9/11, it was used as the major transport route, and all the traffic of the American supplies used to go to Afghanistan. So there was a kind of a corridor which developed. Then the Chinese have developed the roads up in the north. And very, very importantly, KPK has a disproportionate share in remittances. You will be amazed. 100% of the remittances which come to Pakistan, 60% go to Punjab, 30% go to KPK, and only 8% go to Sindh, because most of the families are educated families who have gone out of Sindh. They're not sending money back. The families have gone. And fourth, Balochistan, 2% share. The reason why KPK has taken off in that sense with the fastest growth in the last 10, 12 years is this impetus provided by remittances, which has led to a construction boom, which has led to an increase in services. And believe it or not, today, the level of schooling and so on in KPK has virtually caught up with Punjab. It's amazing. So we have an interesting story of Pakistan's federation. One backward province has tended to catch up, KPK. The other backward province has tended to fall further behind, and that is why overall inequality has not changed dramatically. But let me conclude by saying that my primary concern is the big falling behind of Balochistan. In 1999-2000, it was ranked second. Now it has fallen to the 4th position. Balochistan had a per capita income in 1999-2000, which was 13.7% above the national average. Up to 2018-19, it has experienced negative real per capita income growth. Now it has a per capita income which is 25.1% below the national average. Therefore, with all due respects to the powers that be, some visible, others not so visible, therefore the focus of the Federation of Pakistan will have to be on promoting regional development in our very sacred, important province of Balochistan. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Hafiz Pasha Sahab. It's an excellent presentation, very passionate. Well, I am your discussant, and well, I have some technical comments,
Sure.
and also some observational comments. And in fact, I would like to learn from you about the findings that you have. So essentially, I have 3 comments. See, my first comment relates to the poverty measure, the inequality measure that you have developed, that's the Pashum index. I have seen the theoretical paper that you wrote earlier, which says that this measure fulfills scale invariance. It also fulfills the weak transfer principle, and it is also additively decomposable. There are 2 more properties which I think which are very important in any poverty measure, in any inequality measure. I think one is the subgroup consistency, and the other one is the transfer sensitivity. So transfer sensitivity is particularly an important measure because you also refer to Gini coefficient, and unfortunately, Gini coefficient also violates transfer sensitivity. So the problem is that if there is violation of transfer sensitivity, so it leads to hollowed out middle, where rich become richer and poor become poorer. So this measure is not able to actually capture the difference. So essentially, if there is, let's say, a transfer taking place from a richer poor to a poorer poor, and another transfer that takes place between a rich person and a poor and a relatively less rich person, so the inequality doesn't change. So unfortunately, Pasha index also suffers from the same sort of a drawback which Gini coefficient suffered. So I would like to learn from you that my observation about this measure is that it violates these two properties. Does it violate? I would like to hear from you. And my second point is about the magnitude of inequality in itself. If I see your numbers, so it suggests that inequality, if measured by Gini coefficient, so this is around 8%. So by any standard, 8% inequality is very, very acceptable inequality by any standard. Even if I take the Pasha index, so it also says that inequality is about 22%. Now, the question is that you have used the regional, let's say, GDP numbers, and I was wondering if we use some other, let's say, measure, such as household, let's say, surveys like PSLM or HIS. So how the numbers would differ and how they will change your story if I use instead the PSLM data and HIS data and calculate that what are those numbers. So I have calculated those numbers based on the household survey. So my first sort of observation is that you have suggested that Pasha index says that there is no change in inequality over the 19-year period that you have taken, whereas my estimate suggests that if we take a generalized entropy measure, which fulfills both subgroup consistency as well as transfer sensitivity, if we use those numbers, so they suggest that there is a consistent fall in inequality between 2000 and 2019. And there is a significant sort of decline in inequality, except for the 2006 period. Otherwise, there is a consistent fall. So that's my second point. And my third point relates to the ranking. So it's very fascinating to see that Balochistan ranks at number 2 in Pakistan. That's a surprise for me. And anyone would be surprised to see that number from wherever statistics has come from. Because again, I would like to relate it to some other data to verify if this number is like making any sense. So again, I took the household survey data and I calculated this ranking the way you have done, exactly following the same formula. And I found out that in 1999-2000, Balochistan's rank in Pakistan by PSLM or HIS survey, it was number 4. So it was number 4 in 2000, and when I carried it over for the rest of the time period that you have taken, So it remained number 4 by the end of, let's say, 2019. So my point is that instead of taking the regional GDP, if we take household survey, so Balochistan's rank was number 4 before, and it is number 4 now. However, there is one difference that I found. I found out that Balochistan suffered the decline in per capita income between 2000 and 2007, and there was also decline between 2016 and 2018. However, there was a substantial increase in per capita income by about 2.7% between 2007 and 2016. So if you take the average of the entire period, so you suggest that it's negative, whereas I found out that it is positive and it is about 0.45%. So this is my third comment. I would like
let me
your
get
opinion.
back, Burki Saab, and I must thank you for your outstanding set of comments. I know it's a pleasure to sit in a conference where we get this quality of response. Thank you so much, and the amount of research you've done to look at our conclusions is really outstanding. And I must say I'm inspired by this effort on your part. Thank you. So I'll try and do my best to give you a response. You see, the Pashum index has one quality, which is that it looks at all the quintiles, whereas the Palma ratio looks at the extremes only. And that is why we developed it, because we were keen also to incorporate what's happening to the middle class in a country. So in terms of transfer sensitivity, if you transfer 1 rupee from the top quintile, 1 rupee to the bottom quintile of Pakistan, Pashum ratio shows a decrease in inequality. So it does have that transfer quality at the extremes, but not in between. The point you have raised is right. But it does pick up the loss of the reduction in inequality when there's transfer from the very rich at the top to the very poor at the bottom. The other point that you've made is about the need to have used perhaps other sources of information. You see, the problem with which the Household Integrated Economic Survey is that it hopelessly underreports the incomes of the rich. I'll give you one example. You look at the agricultural census of Pakistan, the last one of 2010, and you will find that the size distribution of farms in terms of acreage is extraordinarily uneven. 1% of the top farmers of Pakistan own 22% of the land in this country. This is a number given to you by the census, official census, agricultural census. No wonder we haven't had a census since then. 22%. And when you look at the resulting inequality coefficient, even the Gini approaches 0.45.5. But you look at the agricultural income distribution at the household level, and we have sitting here one of the finest researchers on agricultural income taxation. Kaise hain aap? So the point is, if you look at the Household Integrated Economic Survey, the Gini which comes out of agricultural income is 0.22, that's it. Can you imagine a Pakistan Bureau of Statistics survey having the courage to walk into a feudal lord's house and say, give me information? Aapka khayal hai? There'll be sampling, non-sampling errors, huge errors. So I've just published in the Pakistan Journal of Applied Economics a true measure of inequality in Pakistan. You might wish to see that article.
I've seen that.
in which I have shown that the Gini coefficient is significantly larger in Pakistan. You adjust for just two things, two main things. Ownership of farmland and ownership of real estate, housing. It's amazing how unequal the distribution. Do you know that 8 million households in Pakistan, with family sizes going up to 7, 8 people, live in one room? In one room? कुछ अंदाजा है आपको गुर्बत का? One room. And there are 2 million households which have 7 to 8 rooms with family sizes of 4 or 5. So when you adjust for these inequalities, you come to closer to 0.45. So with all due respects, HIES has lots of sampling and non-sampling errors, unfortunately. Sure. The PS-LSMS is better, but it does not get into income measures. And it focuses, certainly does a better job of coverage of physically of services. So that is my view on this. And let me just conclude with very good remarks that you've made, and I thank you enormously once again. When you convert this GDP or gross regional product, which is domestic production, into a kind of a concept of an overall measure, which is national income or regional income, it's fascinating, the ranking changes. And because 60% of the remittances go to Punjab, suddenly, Punjab slightly exceeds Sindh. And KPK comes somewhat nearer to Sindh. And the gap for Balochistan widens even further, unfortunately, because there's hardly any remittance income. The point that I'm making is that the 7th National Finance Commission Award, which was an outstanding award, came up with multiple criteria for distribution of revenues among the provinces. I think you were part of that. It was an outstanding award. And it included criteria like land density and population, of course, and particularly human development of poverty. And wrong measures were taken. So that is why we are saying that please let us update our estimates. KPK is doing better. It should accept a slight reduction in its share. Balochistan is doing worse, should be given somewhat larger share. But let me conclude by telling you one thing, finally, before I come to the open questions and answers. I have some good news for you. The 4 constituent units of the federation, their inequality coefficient, you've already highlighted, Burki Sahab, look low, relatively low. Do you know that among the 31 units of Federation of India, the inequality coefficient is 2.5 times higher than Pakistan? India is a federation characterized by much greater inequality. And where is the inequality most pronounced? In large states like Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, West Bengal, Orissa. And what are these states consisting of? Muslim population. And our research has demonstrated that even with India's per capita income 40 to 45% or even more higher than us, today the per capita income of Muslims of India is lower than Pakistani Muslims. And I published this at the time when we were celebrating our 75 years of independence. And you know what happened? There was chaos in Delhi. Because after all, I've served as an Under-Secretary General of the United Nations, and they have to take me seriously. The fact of the matter is that the gap between the Muslims and the others have enormously widened in India. Let me stop here. Okay. Thank you.
Well, the floor is open for any question. Hafiz?
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for the great presentation. I actually had a comment, a question basically, because I wanted to understand. So you have done it, the per capita income calculation, GDP calculation at the regional level. And I'm really not comfortable with the idea of per capita GDP identifying inequality. Because I mean, it's like having 10 houses in the neighborhood, suddenly one person's income doubles, that doesn't really change the inequality level, it just changes the per capita GDP. So did you have any numbers that relate to Gini coefficient at the regional level, or maybe the Pasha index covers that? Because I mean, on a personal note, I come from Sindh and I came to Punjab, and I find it really difficult to reconcile the Sindh being the shining star in this presentation. I really don't get it. So I'm really sorry for that. And because the level of infrastructure that has been, I see here, and also in other places in Punjab, is far better than what I have seen in Sindh, you know. And this is someone coming from there. So I was, because per capita GDP you can have more.
देखिए मैं बता देता हूँ आपको. I'm going to release also some somewhat privileged information. This information in Pakistan tends to be sensitive, but in view of this high quality of response that I got first from Burki Saab and now from you, we have constructed an index of inequality at the division level in Pakistan.
Is that?
And there are just slightly above 31 divisions, very similar. I did this because it turned out, what a coincidence, that India has 31 states, we have 31 divisions. So given the difference in size, we can compare them. So I wanted to compare the inequality among the divisions of Pakistan with inequality in states of India. Let me tell you the findings on inequality inside a province. All right, let me seek a vote. Which province do you think has the greatest inequality among the divisions or the regions within a province? Any response? Sindh? Okay. Who said Punjab? You're right. You see, the inequality, I was also myself accepting. You see, the problem is that exclude Karachi, everything is underdeveloped. So there is no inequality outside Karachi. And that's what reduces inequality. In Punjab, you have a pocket of development in the central and northern part of Punjab. And that's quite extensive. And then you have the South Punjab, which is grossly underdeveloped. Yes, DG Khan, Bhavalpur, and Rajanpur, and there Ismail Khan. On the other side, KPK. The least inequality in Pakistan, KPK. Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Mashallah, I will like to clap for those who said Punjab, because Punjab is unusual. आपने कहा था? Mashallah, आपने क्या research किया हुआ है कुछ इस पर? Your sense of judgment, your feeling.
Not exactly research, but some research.
Yeah, wonderful. आपने भी कहा था. Thank you. Please carry on with your questions.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pasha Saab, for a great enlightening presentation. Imran, मेरा नाम है. Just to change the discourse, मैं ज़रा ज़्यादा आमियाना किस्म का सवाल कर लेता हूँ. बड़ा सादा सा है. वो ये कि आपने कहा कि एक साल में floor prices have doubled, right? I think this is not an economics question. This is more a political science question. I mean, you would have imagined that there would be riots on the street, right? I mean, from your vantage point, where do you go from here? Have you thought about that? And how far can you push this population further?
मैं आपको Do we have the media here? Is the media here? Huh? Okay, then I can speak freely.
Facebook पे जा रहा है. Live coverage हो रही है.
चलिए अब. It's not the first time. Okay. वो तो हो गया जो होना था. One indicator of the makings of an Arab Spring is what's happening to your youth. आज हम चूँकि सारी ज़िंदगी गुजारी है पाकिस्तान पे रिसर्च पे, हालात जब ख़राब होते गए तो हमने एक पूरा रिसर्च किया है on what's happening to the youth population of Pakistan. And the key indicator of this propensity towards Arab Spring is the level and number growth of idle youth. मुझे कहते हुए बेपनाह अफसोस है कि कोई 7-8 साल पहले the number was 7 to 8 million idle youth in Pakistan. आज वो नंबर डबल से ज़्यादा बढ़ चुका है. It's close to 15 million idle youth in your country. Does this not have the makings of a broad-based effort for change and destructive? Unfortunately, some of it has gone in the wrong direction. Do you know that the level of crime in Karachi, for instance, over the last 6 years has tripled? And it's now beginning to happen elsewhere in the country, including Lahore. तो बात यह है कि हम सबके आखिरी दिन हैं ज़िंदगी के. मैं तो बहुत बीमार भी रहा हूँ. हमने सारी ज़िंदगी पाकिस्तान पे काम किया. असद मेरे बहुत प्यारे साथी हैं. Fag end of one's life, one feels that Pakistan has not made it. इस पे मुझे बेपनाह दुख है. तो आपकी बात बिल्कुल मुनासिब है. और एक मैंने आपको इंडिकेटर दिया. दूसरा इंडिकेटर मैंने आपको पॉवर्टी का जिक्र किया. 44%, 110 मिलियन लोग गुर्बत के लकीर के नीचे. तीसरा हमने क्वांटिफाई किया है अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट लेवल क्या है. इस वक्त पाकिस्तान का अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट लेवल डबल डिजिट पे जा चुका है. 10.5% of the population, the labor force is unemployed. 75 lakh workers are unemployed. ऐसे आदाद शुमार मैंने अपनी ज़िंदगी में पाकिस्तान पे रिसर्च किया. मुश्किल हालात में. I was in charge of finance ministry. I was the finance minister at the time of the bomb. People used to say कि तबाह हो जाएगा. हम निकाल के ले आए. मगर आज जो नंबर्स हैं वो मैंने अपनी ज़िंदगी में नहीं देखे थे. और इस बात का बेपनाह हमें अफसोस है.
जी आसम.
I would say, with my experience, you are a rock star economist for my country. Thank you very much for enlightening us. I just want to see the future based on your experience. There is a global debate. Thomas Piketty also stated that the rich should be taxed. So do you think that if we tax the rich, or 22 families in Pakistan should pay more taxes, and then we see any direct relation, inequality will reduce in the country? Second, there is a strong debate on commercial banks. Super tax is the way forward, that the transfer of their profit into the tax, and the government will have more revenue. Do you think such short ad hoc measures can work for Pakistan's development?
इसे ad hoc मत कहिए.
Okay.
ये बहुत फंडामेंटल है. ये हमारे रूह है, हमारे मुल्क का, हमारे निज़ाम का. progressive attempts to reduce inequality and to take care of the incredibly adverse conditions that our people are living in. मैं आपको एक बात बताता हूँ, हमारे एग्रीकल्चर टैक्सेशन आप बैठे हुए हैं, आपको तो पता होगा, इस वक्त मैंने आपसे कहा कि 1%, 22% उनकी इनकम है, लैंड ओनिंग है, ज़मीनें, अच्छी ज़मीनें उनके पास ही हैं जिसमें इरिगेशन लैंड है ज़्यादा प्रोपोर्शन। उनकी आमदनी अगर आप उठा के देख लें तो कम से कम ये बन जाएगी 1100-1200 अरब। टैक्स पाकिस्तान भर से एग्रीकल्चरल इनकम टैक्स से कितनी रेवेन्यू आती है इस 1100-1200 करोड़ अरब से? शर्म नहीं आती? और हमारा जो सैलरीड वर्कर है बेचारा 6 लाख के आमदनी पर टैक्स दे रहा है, 50,000 है उसकी इनकम मंथली, विच इज बिलो द लिविंग वेज, एंड ही इज बीइंग टैक्स्ड इन आवर इनकम टैक्स सिस्टम। 350 अरब की रेवेन्यू है सैलरी क्लास से, और जमींदार माशाल्लाह 3 अरब। ये कौन सा निज़ाम है? फिर आप प्रॉपर्टीज पे आ जाइए, आपको सुन के हैरत होगी कि अर्बन इमूवेबल प्रॉपर्टी टैक्स इज वन ऑफ द लार्जेस्ट सोर्सेज ऑफ रेवेन्यू फॉर लोकल municipal metropolitan governments in the cities across the world. पूरे पाकिस्तान से urban immovable property tax collected by the 4 provinces, कुल रेवेन्यू 25 अरब रुपए। मुंबई मेट्रोपॉलिटन कॉरपोरेशन, एक लोकल गवर्नमेंट हिंदुस्तान का पाकिस्तानी रुपीस में 380 अरब कलेक्ट कर रहा है अर्बन इमूवेबल प्रॉपर्टी में, एक शहर से वहां, और हम सारे मुल्क से खींच खांच के 25 अरब कलेक्ट कर। मैंने पूरी किताब लिखी अर्बन इस चीज पर, ह्यूमन डेवलपमेंट रिपोर्ट, आप सब मुनासिब समझें तो देख लीजिएगा। आई एम सरप्राइजिंग, इट इज सरप्राइजिंग आई एम स्टिल अलाइव। समझ रहे हैं आप? ये निज़ाम चल नहीं सकता। There has to be a measure of equity. And I have seen so much flexibility on the part of the two very competent economists who have even gone to the extent of yielding that the living wage may not be the indicator of minimum wage. It has to be the indicator of minimum wage. ये हक है हमारे लोगों का. And if it cannot be met through market forces, as very rightly said by him, it should be met through social protection mechanisms. Do you know that there are countries in Asia who are devoting over 4% of their GDP for social protection? And how much is Pakistan putting in? 0.6. Yes, 0.6.
Well, we are...
I think I've taken up enough time. मुझे माफ़ कर दें. And चूँकि ग्रुप इतना अच्छा था, मैंने दिल की बात कर दी, मुझे माफ़ कर दें.
Well, next is my presentation. I'll try to be as short as possible because I know that we are running out of time. Okay, so, well, this is some very important points. I think one of the points that he raised was that the wealth tax is very important, and perhaps if we don't introduce the wealth tax, so the tax to GDP ratio perhaps may not be able to increase. The other point that he raised was about the quality of data, especially talked about the highest and PSLM data. With all the limitations that we have, I am going to share with you the findings of, let's say, income, wealth, and wage inequality in Pakistan over the past 30 years. And I've also tried to open the black box to understand that if there are any changes in inequality, so what are the factors or causes that affect inequality? So this is just a work in progress. It's not a, let's say, final sort of word. And whatever finding I have by now, I'll just quickly share with you. As I said, that it provides a preliminary account of the income, wealth, and wage inequality from 1991 to 2020. And we have used extensive data from multiple household surveys, labor force surveys, so roughly about 32 household surveys and about 22 labor force surveys. Based on that, I think there are 2 or 3 important points that I would like to just share. First, I think the question of representation of the upper income groups and also the lower income groups, it requires that there should be some trimming of the data. So I think this is one important point that I just want to share, that rather than taking the data as it is, which has a lot of, let's say, measurement error, so the data is trimmed. So we have trimmed 33 percentage point from below and 3 percentage point from above. So this is basically the distribution that is 96% of the total data. So that's one point that I want to highlight. The second important point is that the household income, which is the basis of any inequality measure, we typically take per capita income. And just like poverty calculation, we have adult equivalence scale to calculate poverty. So that's the difference between inequality data and poverty data. And if you look at this literature globally, especially in Europe, there are lots of studies that have actually conducted inequality analysis, particularly from the grants of Angus Deaton, who was given Nobel Prize. So he has set up a center in UK, and they have come up with a number of studies on inequality. And it is kind of a standard in OECD countries to use not the per capita income, but it's the equivalence scale income. So rather than taking, let's say, all adults as one, so we take, let's say, 0.67 weight is given for the first adult, then 0.33 weight is given for the second adult, and for any other adult, it is 0.3. So that incorporates the economies of scale in the data. Any child in the household is given a weight of 0.2. So this is the equivalent scale that we have used to construct the per capita income, which is equivalent income. Now, wage data is standard. That is from the labor force surveys from 91 to 2001. My main analysis is based on the household survey data. Now, we have actually compiled labor income and non-labor income. And as we all know that there are lots of questions about sampling issues in household surveys. The richer household generally, they are underrepresented, due to which the inequality measures, they tend to be relatively underrepresented. So I think that problem aside, so whatever issues the data has, taking those issues as it is, So I have constructed, it's a very laborious sort of exercise to construct labor income, non-labor income, using lots of different categories that the data actually is presented. So perhaps this is one of the perhaps few studies in many years which have used the income as a source of inequality, because most of the studies recently have taken consumption data to calculate inequality. So when you take consumption data, so inequality generally comes in the range of about 0.3 or 0.3 to 0.32. So that's the range generally in which varies. If we take the entire data without any trimming, so we get an average inequality index of about 0.44, 44% poverty, versus let's say 30% poverty that we get, inequality that we get with the consumption data. So that's, I think, the point that I want to clarify, that this is a household income which takes all kinds of income that are reported, which includes labor income, non-labor income. It includes all kinds of rents, profits, and let's say self-employed earnings and whatever. I have also done some analysis on wealth, which includes 4 types of wealth: property wealth, financial assets, other physical assets, and private pension. And the details are given here. I don't have much time to do that. I have used different, let's say, inequality measures like 90 to 10 ratios, Gini coefficients, and I think the generalized entropy measures, which basically fulfills most of the properties that any inequality measure must fulfill. And I mentioned about the transfer sensitivity, subgroup consistencies, and decomposability. All these things are fulfilled by these measures. And I have also specified these here, and these are the standard formulas for the Gini coefficient. Gini, if I just explain in simplest word, most of the inequality measures take the difference between arithmetic mean and some other mean. So Gini simply is the difference between arithmetic mean and Sen mean. Sen mean is another mean. So some of the measures take, let's say, the difference, and the generalized entropy measures are little more than that. They just don't simply take the difference, they also consider other aspects. So these are 4 measures that I have used because they fulfill most of the properties that any inequality measure must fulfill. I have also tried to, first I have calculated inequality, and then I've tried to decompose inequality. And as I said, that this is just the preliminary analysis. I'm just trying to understand there are different reasons why inequality changes in the country. We don't know what those reasons are. There is no previous research that guides me that what are the factors that affect inequality. So that's why I'm just taking these factors one by one, and so far I have just taken about 3 to 4 factors. Maybe in next 2 months or so, we will take more factors into account, and then perhaps we'll be in a better position to talk about it. Now, what are the trends in inequality? And as I said, that this is the data, income, which I have converted into real terms by using CPI of 2015-16 and converted all income into June 2023 prices. So all income is converted into 2020, June 23 prices. Now, you can see the trend of Gini inequality, despite all its drawbacks. As I said, that it does not fulfill transfer sensitivity, which is one of the important measures that the property that it should fulfill. So inequality actually has jumped in 2006, and since then it is consistently falling. So inequality is consistently falling, except 2019. So when we moved from 2000, let's say 1819 to 1920. So that was the COVID time period. So you could see that there is a sudden increase in inequality that is quite visible. And if I disregard the last year, so my findings suggest that there is a consistent fall in inequality by the Gini coefficient. And similar kind of measure, this is the ratios that I have taken, the 10th percentile, 50th percentile, and 90th percentile. So you could see that their incomes first remain constant, and then they started increasing after, let's say, 2002. And that's the period. And also interesting that the last year, during the COVID, the income of the bottom 10th percentile, it suffered the largest decline. There was little decline in others, but I think this is the major decline that you see because, as we know, due to the lockdown, there are lots of people who are unemployed, and there are lots of, let's say, transfers that took place, private transfers. People helped others in ration and other sort of things. We have all witnessed that in recent years. Okay, so a similar pattern, if I just take the data of every 10 years from 91 to 2000, I find that in let's say 1990s, there was some increase in inequality, but in 2001 to 2011, there was a considerable decline in inequality, and there was also decline. If I ignore the last year, there was a decline, but this increase is only because of the COVID time period. Otherwise, I think all these measures, so I've taken all three generalized entropy measures and Gini coefficient, and they are consistently showing that the inequality has decreased over time. Now, okay, well, if I just take the percentiles, so I think these two graphs indicate two patterns. One, the income of the upper income groups or upper percentiles, they have increased more throughout the time period. And if I break down into 10-year time period, so there are two patterns that you could see. One, that in 90s, the real income remained negative for all percentiles. And we know at that time there was a freeze due to the IMF program. There was freezing of wage for government employees, and that is known to, I think, many of us at that time. So there is a consistent sort of decline in per capita income. Now, the period from 2000 to 2011 was the best period in terms of income growth. And that is not only positive, but I think throughout it was not sort of pro-rich or pro-poor. I think it was kind of neutral, except for the tails. Here, if I see that in this period, 2011 to 20, the income growth of the, let's say, bottom 10th percentile, it was negative. So there was a negative growth in income, and it shows that this was a pro-poor sort of income growth because the growth in income, let's say for the median, was about 2%, and it was even higher for the upper percentile. So that was a pro-rich sort of income growth. Now, I've tried to decompose, and I'll just try to summarize. I don't have time to go into the details. And I find here is that the changes in inequality, basically, I try to see whether it's the wage increase or changes in wages which are affecting inequality more, or the hours worked are also responsible. So what is the difference between hours worked versus the wage rate? So I found out that the major inequality change took place because of the wage increase. It's not the hours worked. So this is shown by the variances, change in variances. I think this column, which is versus this column. So this is much bigger than this one. So I'll just stop here and go to the next slide. I also tried to see that what factors contribute to changes. There are three things I have taken. One, is this the labor income versus non-labor income that has changed, which led to increase or changes in inequality? So the first thing that I find out is that overall inequality is relatively higher in the range of, let's say, 0.46 for Gini, for I think generalized entropy, and it is relatively much higher if I compare with only the data of workers or labor income. So if I take only labor income, inequality is much lower. And if I take labor plus non-labor income, so inequality significantly increases. That's one. A second important point is that most of the inequality in, let's say, main earner versus other earners, that is due to the changes within, let's say, the groups. So within group inequality versus between group, so between group is relatively insignificant. However, there is only one point that is important, that's college degree versus non-college degree, where we find out that there is a significant decrease in within group inequality over time, as shown by all the measures, that this is a sort of declining since 2001. All the measures are declining. So within group inequality is declining, and between group, like college graduates and higher, versus non-college graduates. So their importance has actually increased over time, and it has almost doubled the share. I don't have much time actually to go into the further detail. Maybe I'd just like to share one more slide. If we look at the income and wealth distribution, so we find that there is a strong sort of interaction between wealth and income inequality. Those who are, let's say, income rich, they are also wealth rich. So there is a high correlation, and I think these slides, they tend to show that. And wealth inequality is much higher than income inequality, as you could see that the Gini is about 60% for wealth, and it's only about 33% or 35% for income. So that's another thing. Wealth distribution, wealth inequality is much more, and there are about 30% of the household which own most of the wealth in Pakistan, whereas income is more widely distributed. Well, I think I also try to see the same relationship with the help of wage inequality, and they tend to portray similar trends, except that the share of top labor income, they have significantly gone up. This is for, let's say, top 1% of labor income, and then top 5% and top 10%. So that they show that their income share has gone up between 1991 and 2020. In 30 years' time, there is about 200% increase in the share of the top 1%. So their incomes are going up. Education role, I think, as mentioned before, so this is also supporting. So I've actually taken the household survey data and also compared with the labor force survey data, and I have found some similar kind of results in terms of returns to education. So the returns to education for graduates relative to, let's say, those in the labor force who have primary education, middle education, matric, or intermediate. So their shares have gradually gone up relative to all those. So with this, I would like to stop here. Thank you. So Asad, would you like to share your comments?
First of all, thank you. This was, I urge all of you to go through the paper. It's a very rich exercise, and I'd like to congratulate Burki Saab for doing a very laborious and important work that so far hasn't been done. 30 rounds of the household income expenditure survey and 22 rounds of the labor force survey. The results are in some ways interesting. Some of them are counterintuitive. So you have low inequality in the 90s. It increases in the 2000 to 2011 period and kind of somewhat reduces in the post-2011 period. But the figure 4 that that was put up over here also shows that in the 90s it is it's negative income growth across all percentiles, and that basically shows that we were distributing poverty or stagnation fairly equally. The 2001 to 11 period is one which is interesting, where the share of the lowest percentiles actually increases the fastest. And the last period, 2011 to 2020, it's the share of the highest income which increases the fastest. Now, I was trying to think of economic reasons for this, and I could not sort of grapple, or intuitively there did not appear to be good economic reasons, or at least apparent economic reasons for these changes that are taking place. So it's something we can kind of go more into detail on this. We're short on time, but I mean, that's the next step that we would need to take. There was one question, brief one, is that you put pensions in wealth. Why not in income? And that's one question. And although I'm sure that doesn't really alter your results too much. There is another table which is very Piketty-ish, and in that sense useful, obvious but useful, because it's shown through an extensive data exercise. And that is that if you start with wealth, you tend to be better educated, and once you're better educated, your incomes are higher. So it's both the wealth effect and the income effect that you see at the top end of the income distribution, which is originating from prior wealth. And Burki Saab does mention in the paper that here's a case for inheritance tax. I'm, in my stage in life, a realist, and I don't expect that to happen for a long time in Pakistan. But that's very clearly the situation over here, and I think it's a much more stark Piketty-ish sort of conclusion. Another one which he hasn't presented over here, and I thought was actually very interesting, was that if you look at gender disparity in wages, we see a convergence in the top quintile between wages of men and women, but a great divergence in the other the bottom 3 quintiles. And my friend Nida is not here, but others may be, that the women's movement in Pakistan should really, considering that many of them come from the upper quintile, or at least the leaders of the movement come from the upper quintiles, have done a great job in reducing inequality in that quintile, but a lot remains to be done for the rest. So I would stop there. But again, my congratulations. It's wonderful exercise, and we need to do a lot more.
Thank you. Thank you, Asad. Just quick response to maybe one or two points, and then I'll open it for discussion. Well, I think you are right. As I said, that this is just a work in progress. What are the reasons for the changes in inequality, especially, I think, the period, the latest decade? I'm trying to actually find out the reasons, but as I said, that I'm just in the middle of this exercise, so I don't have answer to that why inequality sort of was more pro-rich in one decade and pro-poor in other decades. That's a very interesting question. Pensions, you said that, well, in fact, pensions, there are two parts of pension. One, which is a long-term sort of investment. So that type of pension, which is invested in somewhere, so that's taken as wealth. And the other pension, which they normally get as a compensation on a monthly basis, so that is taken as income. So I've tried to follow the literature, and I've taken the same definition, which is taken by other studies, so there are not any surprises over there. I could not present my results on, let's say, based on the gender disparity and others. And there are lots of very interesting information, and just want to share one result. If we look at the disparity, gender disparity, what we see is that generally the wages of the female workers are about 50% lower on average. So on average, female wages are about 50% lower. However, this gap becomes closer and closer as we move up the ladder and go to the upper percentiles. So by 80th percentile, the gap almost shrinks and becomes zero. Most of the inequalities, they exist in, let's say, percentiles which are below 80th percentile. So it tends to basically, the gap is high, it's more than the mean until 50th percentile, and then it tends to fall and become zero for the later percentile. So that's the finding about it. Now I think I can take questions from the floor. I'll be happy to answer. Yes, Haris? Okay.
Hello, sir. So Haris here.
I'm fine.
Okay. So as you've shown the evidence that there has been a huge gap and increase in the income of a graduate versus non-graduate. So I wanted to ask, is this related to specific type of degree? For example, we see people having a degree in IT and they got a job into the IT industry. We see there's a huge shoot in their income. And I would also like you to tap onto this interesting topic of IT industry in the informal job market, how it is playing its role in the labor force.
Okay, any other question? Okay.
Anjum Saab.
Ji, Anjum Saab.
One of the slides shows your Gini coefficient to be negative.
No.
It's not the
No,
case.
it's not Gini, it's percentile income growth. That's the growth incidence curve. So that was negative. Gini is not negative.
-5%.
Gini cannot be negative, I'm sorry. Okay, over there. Osama.
Thank you, Burki Saab. Just, I guess, a question of clarification. The indices that you were using, is it fair to say that these are all relative measures of inequality? In the sense, because when you were describing the Gini coefficient, or for example, even the Thiel index, I take it you're either sort of looking at the difference from some mean, or you're looking at ratios between quantiles, correct?
No, it's not the ratios between quantiles. It's basically the entire distribution is being used. From there, I think just like the Gini, because it takes the entire data, because ratios take a certain data point in the entire distribution. So they actually sometime like Pashum ratio or others. I think Pasha Saab has mentioned. So there is quintile ratio, there is partial means ratio. So they are at certain points in the distribution. But all inequality measures, they take the entire distribution. So they convert it into sometime quintile, and from there the estimates are done. So
more generally, I guess my question is, should we understand these indices as relative measures of inequality, say across provinces?
It's relative measure.
So then, to that point, then I'm just wondering the choice of the methodology there, right? Because one way that I could get a very nice Gini coefficient is to give everybody nothing, right? Just extreme egalitarianism where everybody gets nothing. Whereas some of the points that, for example, Dr. Pasha was making, the political economy context, stuff about the Arab Spring, disillusioned, idle youth, for example, right? These, to me, point to considerations of, say, absolute levels of poverty and therefore absolute levels of inequality.
Well, these are two different sort of approaches. Poverty literature is very different because you need to convert, and I think there are measures like a basic need sort of poverty and the energy intake method. So they take every household member's sort of the calorie intake, and based on that, we construct an index. So I think that's entirely a different literature. So my focus is on relative inequality. It's not absolute inequality. Yeah, Hazard?
We are out of time.
Okay, just last question. Okay.
Thank you so much. First of all, it's wonderful, rich work. I actually have to go through it before I can comment on anything. I just have one question, that there's a lot of underrepresentation because a lot of the rich do not share a lot of data. So you show a downward trend in inequality. Do you think if we incorporate the unreported information, do you think that tendency will go reverse or will it go in the same trend?
Well, I think there is a tendency in the international literature that they try to supplement the household surveys with some other data sets to modify the, let's say, the incomes of the top quintiles, because they are more likely to be underrepresented. So that's what I think they have done in the UK. And they have taken another data set. But unfortunately, in Pakistan, we do not make public the tax records, which is one of the bases of, I think, most of the influential work right now internationally. Thomas Piketty's work, I think, they take administrative data. So my point is that the administrative data is not available that can supplement the household survey data so that we modify the income quintiles which are at the top, like top 10% of them. So if that is possible, so then perhaps we can come up with much relevant sort of numbers. Yeah, Anjum?
That kind of data was available for a few years.
Yeah.
And was publicly accessible, online data.
For tax record?
For each individual, you had their income aggregated. And then it was, it was in conflict with some law, and so for a few years.
Anjum, it's very surprising that the laws only come into play in Pakistan. India has published their tax records from 1920 to the present time. And already there are papers, that Thomas Piketty and Banerjee, they have a paper on Indian inequality, and they have taken the administrative data, the same data that you are mentioning. So like we had the same laws before partition, and many of the laws are same. So I don't know why we have different laws when it comes to asset sort of taxation, wealth taxation, and also tax data.
Taxation is also hugely underreported.
So that's also not relevant.
So I mean, that would still leave that gap.
Okay.
But that's in some ways besides the point.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm actually being signaled. Thank you. Thank you all.